Hello, welcome back. What you're about to hear may not be to your liking. This is not just a superficial reading, but a deep examination and analysis, embellished with visuals. Today, we will examine why this book is so important and what it has changed in our lives. I'll grab my coffee and get started.
We are obsessed with the next big thing, aren't we? We're building a world of silicon and comfort, convinced that every new gadget is a step toward utopia. But what if our greatest triumph is actually our final mistake? Welcome to the dimly lit halls of daily books. I am Fatih. Today, we aren't just summarizing H.G. Wells's 1895 masterpiece, The Time Machine. We are looking into a mirror that's had 800,000 years to gather dust. Think about your life right now. Every app, every delivery service, every medical breakthrough is designed to remove friction. We want a world without pain, without labor, without the unpleasant parts of being human. But Wells, writing at the dawn of the industrial age, saw the dark punchline to that joke. He understood that when we finally kill the beast of struggle, we also kill the spark of intelligence. Imagine a world where all disease is gone and every hunger is satisfied. You'd call it paradise. Wells calls it the end of the human soul. In the year 802,701, our protagonist, the time traveler, didn't find the gods he expected. He found the Eloi. Small, beautiful, golden-skinned creatures with the minds of 5-year-olds. They are the ultimate haves, the descendants of our current elite who won the game of life so decisively that they forgot how to play it. But here at Daily Books, we know that physics and history demands a balance. For every sun-drenched surface, there must be a lightless basement. And in the basement of humanity, the Morlocks are waiting. They are the have-nots, the forgotten workers who were pushed underground until the darkness became their skin and the light became their enemy. This isn't just a science fiction story. It is a biological prophecy. It asks a terrifying question. Is our modern drive for comfort actually an evolutionary suicide note? If we automate our thinking, if we outsource our struggle, who or what will we be in 1,000 generations? Will we be the cattle, or will we be the butchers? Let us step into the machine. Let us see the end of the world, not with a bang, but with the soft, mindless laughter of the Eloi. This is why the Daily Books community questions everything. We don't just read, we dissect the future before it dissects us. When he stepped out of the time traveler's machine, he looked at the enormous white marble sphinx standing before him. This sphinx was not merely a statue. It was the tombstone of a riddle whose answer no one knew. Look at the world around you. The fruits are enormous, the flowers are dizzying, and the air is like eternal spring. But there is something strange about this beauty. There is no maintenance. There are no gardeners. There are no laws. Here we encounter the painful truth that the Daily Books community emphasizes most. Intelligence is the child of hardship. If you place all a species' needs before it, that species has no need to think. The Eloi are the final stage of this comfort trap. When our traveler looked at their childlike joy, He saw not the next stage of humanity, but its final days. They are elegant, beautiful, but empty. They have no art, no history, no curiosity. They simply eat, sleep, and dance in the sun. But why do they produce nothing? Because nature eliminates organs that are no longer needed. If there are no problems left to solve in your life, your brain becomes nothing but a burden. In describing 800,000 years into the future, Wells is actually judging our excessive pursuit of comfort in today's world. In a world where algorithms make decisions for us and machines work in our place, are we also on our way to becoming modern Eloi? But the real horror begins when the traveler looks down into the dark, deep ventilation shafts beneath the ground. As delicate as the Eloi above, the Morlocks below are just as savage and mechanical. Now pause and let this analysis sink in. Wells took the deep class divide in Victorian England and turned it into an evolutionary destiny. What happens when that world, where the rich live in sunny parks and the workers in dark underground mines, remains unchanged for thousands of years? Genetics takes the place of sociology. There are no longer just rich and poor. There are now two distinct biological species. The Morlocks are light-hating, white, hairy, and cold creatures. But here's the irony: they still possess intelligence. Why? Because they still work. They repair the machines, tend the pumps, keep the world turning. Intelligence survived in the Morlocks because they never severed their ties to hardship. But this intelligence is no longer a human virtue. It has become an animal cunning. When the traveler descended into the Morlocks' dark underground kitchens, he realized that shocking truth. The Morlocks fed the delicate Eloi above, yes, but not out of charity. They fed them like a shepherd feeds his sheep. When night fell and the moon set in that false paradise, the Morlocks would come up, and they dragged those beautiful golden-skinned Eloi into the darkness to their dinner tables. This is the darkest lesson the daily books dwells upon. If you condemn one class entirely to labor and drown the other entirely in pleasure, eventually one side becomes the hunter, the other merely cattle raised for their meat. Wells leaves us a warning sign with this work. What we call progress, if devoid of justice and hardship, is merely a construction site where we build our own demise. The aristocracy chose to become meat by destroying its own muscles and mind. The working class became the butcher out of the rage of exclusion. So where are you in this evolutionary hierarchy? Who is paying the price for your comfort? And when the lights go out, can you hear those voices coming from beneath the earth? When the lights go out, the mask of civilization does not merely fall, it shatters. The time traveler, searching for his lost machine, did not merely descend into a physical tunnel. He embarked on a journey of no return into the darkest recesses of the human soul and social engineering. Listen carefully to this section, for it contains the concept of evolutionary debt that the daily books community emphasizes. Descending through those enormous ventilation shafts underground into the world of the Morlocks, the traveler found not only rusty iron and damp walls. There he found the forgotten, outcast children of the Industrial Revolution, deprived of sunlight for hundreds of thousands of years. The Morlocks were no longer human. They were things with enormous cold lanterns that glowed in absolute darkness, hearing and feeling everything in the darkness. So why were they still there? Why didn't they come up to the surface and wipe out those weak, defenseless Eloi in a single night? The answer lies in Wells's most subtle and ingenious observation. Habit is stronger than iron chains. The Morlocks continued to operate the machines because working and serving were ingrained in their genetic code. But this was no longer conscious service. The clothes they produced were worn by the Eloi. The clean water they pumped flowed upwards. On the surface, the Morlocks were still slaves, but when the traveler touched a table he had found by touch in that dark cave, he felt the truth in all its nakedness right down to his bones. There was fresh meat on the table. Now, pause for a moment and consider the history of this world. 800,000 years later, there were no large-headed animals left on Earth. Horses, cows, sheep, all had become extinct. So what was that fresh, bloody meat on the table? It was at that moment that the great bargain, chilling to the travelers and our very blood, was revealed. The Morlocks were not merely feeding the delicate Eloi above, they were breeding them. The Eloi were no longer masters, but merely a food source. Wells tells us this: if you condemn one society to utter misery and another to utter luxury, eventually those living in luxury become the hunters, and those living in misery become the butchers. This is the final destination of class conflict: organic recycling. Do you know what the traveler's only defense was as he tried to escape this dark labyrinth? Matches. A handful of small, fragile pieces of wood. For the Morlocks, fire was not just a burning light, but a god they had forgotten for thousands of years. Every time the traveler struck a match, those pale creatures retreated like ghosts. But the matches were running out, just as humanity's rational mind was running out in the face of this savage future. We must pause here and ask ourselves, what monsters are we feeding beneath the earth today? What segments are we rendering invisible for our own comfort and cheap consumption? As the Daily Books community, we know that every pain ignored today creates its own executioner and its own feast in the future. When the traveler returned to the surface, he could no longer look upon the Eloi with his former admiration. He saw them as beautiful but stupid animals waiting to be led to the slaughter. Their games were now a tragedy, their songs a dirge. Even his devotion to Weena was overshadowed by this terrifying knowledge. Humanity had split its heritage in two, and both parts had lost their humanity. One side had lost its mind, the other had buried its soul and compassion underground. The traveler had to wait until the following night to escape. He had to retrieve his machine from inside that marble sphinx, but the Morlocks had now caught his scent too. To them, this stranger was just another type of meat, different, more resilient. When darkness fell, he could begin to hear those ominous clicking sounds, those wet footsteps coming from the depths of the forest. Thousands of Morlocks were emerging one by one from their holes underground, surrounding the traveler and Weena in that pitch-black darkness where there was no moonlight. There was nowhere to run. The forest had become a trap. The traveler's last resort was to start a fire. When he set the dry branches alight, the flames not only drove away the Morlocks, they turned the entire forest into a vast inferno. The fire he started to save himself trapped the only being he loved, Weena, in the darkness and smoke. This scene by Wells is in fact a summary of all human history. As darkness grows stronger, the way we use the last light we have either saves us or destroys everything. As the traveler watched thousands of Morlocks burn that night, he was actually looking at the ashes of his own kind. Intelligence ultimately is just a tool for survival, but when that tool spirals out of control, it burns everything to ashes along with its owner. Now, I ask you, isn't this fire 800,000 years from now the result of the small fires we burn today? At the Daily Books, we don't just read books, we seek ways to survive that fire. When the traveler finally reached his machine, he was no longer the same man, and his journey was not yet over, for he had to witness not only the end of time, but also the death of the universe. They say fire cleanses everything, but sometimes it leaves only regret behind. The time traveler, as he turned the forest into a hell that night, did not burn the Morlocks. He lost the last shred of humanity's innocence, little Weena, in those flames. Amid the chaos, the traveler saw the marble sphinx's doors open. It was a trap, he knew. The Morlocks wanted to pull him inside and bury him in the darkness with his machine. But the traveler, with an engineer's agility, leapt onto his machine and pushed the lever all the way, not to turn back this time, but to go further, much further. Now, fasten your seatbelts, Daily Books community, because here the story shifts from being a social critique to pure cosmic horror. As the traveler watched his machine's gauges spin wildly, he saw days turn to minutes, years to seconds. Humanity had vanished thousands of years ago. The Eloi and the Morlocks had been wiped out in that famous fire and the subsequent ice ages. When the traveler traveled millions of years into the future, the world was no longer the green planet he knew. The sun was no longer yellow and full of life. It was a massive, blood-red, dying star covering the sky. The traveler stopped his machine on a beach, but this beach was not like those in your holiday memories. The sea was no longer blue, but a deep purple and completely still. There were no waves, there was no wind, there was no sound, only absolute entropy. Here, Wells was telling us about the most terrifying law of physics in the 19th century: heat death, the exhaustion of the universe's energy.
Looking around, he saw enormous crab-like creatures moving slowly along the edge of that purple sea. Humanity was no more, replaced by these cold-blooded, mindless beasts. But time did not stand still. The traveler grabbed the lever again. He traveled 30 million years into the future. Now those giant crabs were gone too. The air had become so thin that breathing was torture. The sky had completely darkened, with only the faint glow of that enormous red sun. And there, in the snow, he saw a black, round, tentacled thing jumping. This was the last living thing on Earth, as simple as an amoeba, as silent as a corpse. Here, we face the deepest philosophical question of Daily Books. All our efforts, all our wars, all the books we wrote, and all the empires we built, if our end is this silent frozen beach, what does it matter?
Wells brings his reader to the very edge of this nihilism. At the end of humanity's glorious history, only cold darkness and a leaping tentacle remain. Intelligence was a mistake, civilization a parenthesis, and that parenthesis was now closing. The traveler was horrified by this absolute loneliness. He realized then that even the savagery of the Morlocks was preferable to this silence. At least there was a sign of life, a conflict. But here, at the end of time, there was only emptiness. He returned to his machine, reversed the lever, and began to flee back to his own time, to that smoky, noisy, but alive Victorian London. Pause. When he returned home, he appeared before his guests with torn clothes, bloodied feet, and the weariness of 1,000 years in his eyes. He told his story, but no one believed him. Who would want to believe? Who would want to hear that at the end of the universe there was only a silent beach? Only one person, our narrator, sensed the truth when he looked at those 2 white flowers. Those flowers were proof that compassion could survive even when human intelligence was gone.
The traveler boarded his machine again the next day, took a camera and a few belongings with him, and never returned. Where did he go? Perhaps to rescue Weena, perhaps to try to change that dark future. But we, the Daily Books community, know this. The traveler did not actually run away. He sacrificed his comfort to seek the truth. Wells reminds us, time is passing, the sun is cooling, and we must protect the humanity represented by those 2 white flowers, rather than sleep like the Eloi or tear apart like the Morlocks. Now, look out your window. Look at the city lights, the bustle of people. One day, it will all be submerged in the silence of that purple sea. But today, we still have time. We can still read. We can still think. And most importantly, we can still be kind to one another. This is the greatest legacy the Daily Books have left you. Before the darkness comes, what will you use your light for?
And here we are. After 800,000 years of horror, the traveler finally returned to his own time, to that smoky but safe London evening. His friends at the table didn't believe him. For them, it was just a lab story. But the traveler left 2 dried white flowers on the table. These flowers were the only proof that compassion and selfless love could survive even in that dark future where intelligence collapsed, classes devoured each other, and the sun had gone out. H.G. Wells left us with this question. If everything will one day be buried in the silence of that dark beach, why do we strive today? Our answer at Daily Books is clear. Because those 2 white flowers are us, our curiosity, our passion for reading, and our quest for meaning are the only reality that stands against entropy. The traveler boarded his machine again the next day and never returned. Perhaps he is still fighting somewhere to change that future. But your machine is here. The books in your hands, these analyses you are listening to, these are your time machines. Here at Daily Books, we don't just summarize, we strive to keep the human spirit alive. We read so not to surrender to the darkness of the Morlocks, not to be trapped by the empty stares of the Eloi. If you too wish to be part of this intellectual resistance, this Daily Books army, make that decision now. Before the lights go out completely, which side will you stand on? Subscribe, turn on notifications and leave your answer to this question below. What do you think will save humanity? Technology or the compassion represented by those two white flowers? Remember, time is ticking, and every second brings us a little closer to the shore of that purple sea. But today, we still have time to think. I'm Fati. Keep following us, because we'll continue to be your guide in the darkness. Until the next book review, farewell.